I've gone through quite a bit of culinary gymnastics in the past couple of years, just cooking for myself out in the wilderness. We tend to think that our highest survival priority is going to be finding and purifying water, but we also need to pay attention to our skills in preparing and cooking our food, especially if we end up in a long-term bug-out situation or even in a survival situation. Your ability to harvest the most nutrients from your food is going to sustain you for longer periods of time, and so knowing how to prepare pine needle tea so that you don't destroy the vitamin C in there, knowing how to cook and prepare scorpions or snakes is really important. So in this video, I'm going to go through the entire spectrum of your best case scenario where you're bugging out in a vehicle or you've got some vehicle resources, all the way up to the point where you need to eat what you can catch and cook. I'm Clarice, welcome to the Live Ready channel. On that spectrum of being able to cook for yourself in the wilderness, your best case scenario is going to be if you have actually planned to go out into the bush and you have prepared some meals in advance for yourself. That's the easy side of things, and I'm going to go through a whole progression of cooking up to the point where you're cooking fish on a stick or even a scorpion on a stick. For today's cooking, I have brought along what I have prepared, and tip number one is pack your stuff in Ziploc bags, especially if it's something that can leak. There's a bit of tomato soup and steak. Yeah, you like the steak. I did this last night. I made a little bit of tomato soup, chili tomato soup. So it's not for doggies, no, but Mama brought you some food too. All right, so I'm going to make that with all the little bits and pieces in between, but I'm also going to tell you how I've cooked in the worst case scenarios. So I think the most luxurious cooking that I've really done in the wilderness was probably camping in the snow about this time last year. I have a Dometic 55-litre fridge, which I use to take some things and keep them cold, keep fresh stuff cold, but I also made a batch of pancake batter for myself. So I took my pancake batter along and there I was flipping pancakes in the snow. I think that's the easy side of cooking. So it's great to be able to prepare meals for yourself in advance, and even for bug out purposes, you also need to think and plan ahead for what meals you're going to want, what kind of nutrition you're going to get. And as that situation progresses, you're going to find that you're starting to rely more on natural resources for vitamins and things like that. So from the start, you can supplement your diet with things like vitamins and minerals from pine needles, and having a bit of pine needle tea is a wonderful pick me up because it's such a nice warm little beverage to have in the wilderness, and pine trees are found all over. You don't need to cook for survival purposes all the time. So this was a bit of chili tomato soup that I made last night that I'm just going to warm over the fire for today. And I've got a bit of steak. No, it's not for doggies, it's not for, no, Hunter. Right, so when it starts getting a little bit more difficult is cooking over an open fire. So cooking on a wood stove is one thing because you can control the temperature quite well. Cooking on an open fire is a little bit more difficult because what happens is still not for you. What happens is because the temperature swirls, you're getting varied temperatures. And being able to cook meat perfectly or even bake a bread on an open fire, especially in South Africa, is considered an absolute essential skill. And you need to be able to do it well as well. One thing to be able to cook on a fire, but to be able to cook your food in a manner that is nutritious is a whole different situation. So when we go from cooking on an open fire, cooking in pots and pans, it's one thing if you have got all of the pots and pans and all of the kitchen utensils that you need. Maybe you're out in your vehicle and you've got a whole kitchen set or a pantry set up in your vehicle. But if you've hiked out on foot, you might not have carried the braai grid with. I have a favorite braai grid. It fits on the back of my vehicle. It fits on my spare tire, so it's great because it doesn't dirty my vehicle. So if you are setting up your vehicle as a bug-out vehicle, you really can consider things like that go on the outside of the vehicle. But if you're hiking into the bush and you need to actually carry everything with you in a bag, then carrying a braai grid might not be the best idea, nor is it really essential because you can cook on rocks. But to be able to cook on a rock, you also need to know how to select that rock. Recently, Hunter and I did a little wild camp. I did actually have a very small flat braai grid, a folding braai grid with me, but I found a rock that I thought might be good to cook on. So instead of cooking on my braai grid, I cooked my steak on the rock and some veggies in the Dixie, which, by the way, is like my favorite cooking equipment, is my Dixie and my canteen cup combination. Right, so the Dixie went along too, and I could have cooked the steak in the Dixie, but the rock was more fun. So like I said, some of it is purely experimental and some of it is due to necessity. So how to select a rock for cooking on? Try to get a rock that is flat, relatively thick, okay? Not too thin, because otherwise if it splits, you're gonna lose the whole rock. And rocks that have been in water or have been submerged are more likely to split if you put them on a fire. The reason for this is, and you won't believe it, but rocks actually do absorb water over time. So if you take a rock from a river and you put it on a fire, the water inside that rock, when it heats up, it starts to expand and it's going to cause the rock to split more readily. You can apply the same thing to using hot rocks to warm yourself if you're in a shelter and it's cold temperatures. You can place some rocks around your fire and you can move them into your shelter or around your shelter to heat you up. Again, if those rocks come from a river, then they're going to be more likely to split. So if you're going to cook on a rock, first of all, get one that's not been submerged in water. Secondly, make sure that it's relatively flat and evenly thick. Thirdly, give it a good scrubbing and a good wash, because even though it's going to go on the fire and all of the bacteria and stuff that is on there is probably going to die, you still don't want all the grit to be in your food. So give it a good scrubbing. Don't submerge in water, but do clean it with water, and then make sure that it heats up nice and evenly before you cook your food on there or before you put your meat on there. So now we're starting to look more at cooking with natural materials, and in some instances you might be in a permissive environment where you can make fire, and in some instances you might not be in a permissive environment, or the materials that you have used to make your fire, maybe you didn't have a wood around that is not poisonous. For example, if you have made fire with something like a wild fig that's actually poisonous, then you can cook your food anaerobically. This has two advantages. One, you are preventing the fumes from the wood or anything that's poisonous from entering into your food. We do the same thing when we make charred cloth. We cook it in a tin, so you can use something like a cake tin or anything that you can really seal off to the best of your ability without it actually being a completely sealed system. So you want air to be able to escape from that tin but not enter the tin. And that's going to give you an anaerobically cooked meal from the tin. The second advantage of cooking anaerobically is that you're containing all of the scent from that cooking. So for example, if you don't want anybody to be alerted to your presence by the smell of your food or by the smell of the smoke from your fire, you might build a Dakota fire pit to conceal your fire or conceal the smoke from your fire through the trees or the tree canopy, but the scent of your food cooking on a fire can still alert people to your presence in the wilderness. And if you're cooking it anaerobically in a tin, like a cake tin for example, then you're containing the scent and all the molecules that carry scent in that cake tin. Allow it to cool down nicely and you won't be alerting anyone to your presence through the scent of your food. My soup is warming up nicely here now. Then we start to get to a sort of hybrid situation where maybe you've got some of your best cooking and overlanding equipment, your kitchen stuff is all there, but you don't necessarily have food sources left. Then you need to start hunting and trapping or foraging from the environment what you can get. And then you might start looking at cooking snakes or scorpions or things like that. Now, the adders in South Africa are actually great food. One, they're quite staunch. So there's quite a bit of meat on something like a puff adder or a berg adder and even the night adders. And even though they're all very venomous snakes and they're really fast strikers, they don't run very fast. So if you can pin them down with a stick, you can make a meal out of a snake quite easily. Now, wilderness food or animals from a wilderness environment tend to not have a lot of fats on them, and as survivalists or even as the preparedness folk and bushcraft folk, what we really want for survival purposes is a lot of fat and a lot of protein. But you've also got to supplement your diet with other things from the environment. You still need vitamins and minerals, so we're going to get to those ones shortly. But when you are cooking something like a puff adder on a fire, on an open fire, what you're going to do is you're going to actually dry that meat out quite a bit because there's not a lot of fat on it. So if we take, for example, a little hybrid cook where we've got an open fire, but we've got something like a cake tin, cooking a puff adder in a cake tin is actually a great idea because you're going to retain all the moisture of that meat. So cooking something in a closed environment like that is also very good. Although it is really tasty when you've cooked it on an open fire, there's a benefit to cooking something on a wood fire because it actually draws that wood fire smoke and that taste from the wood. No, Hunter, it's still not for you, boy. Mama did bring you something. Yeah, Mama did bring you something, don't worry. Now, if you are cooking in the wilderness, you still need things like vegetables for vitamins and minerals, and for just all of the nutrients that you gain from veggies and from plants. So we still need vitamin C, and we still need vitamin A, and we still need some minerals. So we can get those from things like pine needles, for example. So pine needle tea is really amazing. They actually used to use it to treat scurvy on the ships. And because it's so high in vitamin C and vitamin A, they did actually manage to treat the scurvy, and it lasts quite long as well. So you can take pine needles that are relatively old and they will still have some vitamins in them. And it's really simple to make. You really just bruise the pine needles. You can chop them up, but I find it's really more effective if you just bruise the pine needles. So bruise them, use the spine of your knife, use them, bruise it on like a piece of wood or something like that, and then steep them in simmering water. Now I said earlier, if you boil or you prepare it incorrectly, you destroy the vitamin C and the vitamin A in the pine needles. They're really high in vitamin C and vitamin A. But if it boils, then you're destroying the vitamins in there. So it's important to know that you should only simmer pine needle tea in order to harvest the most nutrients from that dish or from that bit of tea. And you can supplement your diet of things that you've hunted or foraged with berries. You just need to know which ones are edible in your environment. That really is your bit of homework to go and do, is to see that you understand what things in your environment are edible and that you're able to identify them. As it happens, mushrooms I would actually veer away from. Even some of the best mushroom foragers have made mistakes, and it's just not worthwhile putting yourself in a situation like that in the wilderness where you are already at risk and you don't have access to medical help. Don't take the risk on something like a mushroom or something that is foreign to you. This is for you. You see? This is for both of us. It's Mama's steak here. Okay, so I've got a bit of steak here that I've kept over. A lot of this is leftovers, and you can do that if you are in the bush and you know that you're going to spend some time outdoors. No, Hunter, not yet. Prep a meal for yourself in advance. It saves you time. It doesn't necessarily save you money, but this was a beautifully cooked piece of steak, a really beautiful medium rare right there, and I'm now going to cut it up and add it into my soup. A vegan friend asked me recently, do I think that vegans can survive in the wilderness on a vegan diet? And I said to her, you know what, maybe for a day or two, maybe for a short period of time, but generally not in the long run. So we do need protein to survive, and I must keep one for Hunter. So in the wilderness, we really want to focus on gaining proteins and fats, but not all proteins need to necessarily come from, no, I'm also hungry. Not all proteins necessarily have to come from animals. Sea lettuce, for example, is really high in protein, especially for a plant. But things like scorpions are also really high protein, and they're actually quite easy to find. Now, I had such a giggle because on the survival instructor course that I did a couple years ago, one of the guys, after coming back from the solo survival part of that course, said that it poured like crazy during the solo survival. So he comes back and he says he's lying there and he just sees the water level rise around his campsite, and as the water level rise, all of the worms and things also come out of the soil because it becomes saturated with water. And in that time, he saw 3 massive worms coming out of the soil too. And he looked at them and he thought, okay, well, that's food. And he literally took them raw and just stuffed them in his mouth and swallowed as quick as he could. which I thought was horrendous, because if there's one thing that I really gril for, that I really don't want to eat, it's a worm. I know, I'm such a girl. I'll eat the scorpions and I'll eat the snakes, but not worms. Anyhow, it is important to be able to cook things like that. And they are good protein also. But things like scorpions, for example, they carry parasites, so we can't eat them raw. So if you are going to cook a scorpion, first of all, take the stinger off, then kill the scorpion, then skewer it on a stick, preferably not a stick that is from a poisonous kind of plant or from a poisonous tree. Like wild fig is poisonous, for example, around here, and I'm sure everywhere else there's also a whole bunch of different trees that are poisonous. So skewer it with something that's not poisonous. Or if it's a fish or something like that. A fish is actually quite easy to do if you do like a little cross through the fish, because that flays it open quite nicely. But if you find a rock, you can cook on a rock as well. But scorpion, yeah, you've got to cook it quite well without actually burning all of the scorpion away. Okay, I think my soup is just about ready. This is alphabet soup, and the reason why I decided on alphabet soup today, well actually last night, was because somebody asked me previously what I was making in a previous video. Okay, so alphabet soup is literally, it's chili tomato soup with a bit of alphabet noodles in it. I know it's silly, but it's funny. And last night I actually stood there picking out the whole alphabet from all of the noodles, and I think the only ones I couldn't find was Bravo and Oscar. So I substituted, I think, an extra Q and I don't know what. But anyway, so alphabet soup. Okay, so just gonna add these in. So I think that just about covers the entire spectrum of overlanding and bugging out with a vehicle right through to surviving off the land, and how you can cook different things. And I hope that you have found some valuable skills here. Remember that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And the Amplified actually said it so nicely, Philippians 4 verse 13. It said, I am sufficient in Christ's sufficiency, and I am ready for anything. And I thought that was really cool for Live Ready. Anyhow, if you found value here, remember to hit like and subscribe. Follow me on social media. There's plenty of the everyday Live Ready stuff that goes on there. And until the next time, Live Ready.